again, the moment to just let it sink in, yeah? This is why I'm even coming with my quiet indoor room voice. Just let it sink in. I am sure some people have questions, but we will not yet be taking them. So keep thinking of the questions, keep rephrasing them, because if you have been to any landscape talk, we keep it short and sweet, okay? So you say your name, and then you say where you're from, and then the question or comment, quick comment. So keep preparing those. And if you're watching us live, please go to slido.com, and there you can send in your question. And the password is Bonn2019, hashtag Bonn2019. Then you can send your comment or a question that you might have. And if you're tweeting about this session and you have any questions, I will also be getting your questions online. Okay, so in case you do not want to speak, you can tweet me the question. It's at Wanjiko Mwaura, but just use the hashtag GLFBonn2019, and I will be sure to get your question. All right? So now for our fourth speaker, who will be sharing with us, how do you communicate the knowledge that you have? You might have incredulous amount of knowledge, but then how do you make sure that I understand it? Please help me welcome to the stage George Marshall from Talking Climate with Breaking the Ice and Melting the Poles. Please, a very, very warm welcome to George Marshall.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? That's good. Everyone has a right, a fundamental right to know about climate change, to understand it, to understand the causes, to understand what they need to do to respond to it, to be ready for it, to protect and defend themselves against the issue. That is a right. And we have failed to meet up to that right. The vast majority of people around the world are very concerned about the changing weather, but they still do not understand what is causing it. They still do not understand the scale or the seriousness of it, and they're still very, very poorly prepared for dealing with it. And this is important. This is important because people need to know what is happening if it's something this big. But it's important also because all policy is underpinned by a contract with the public. And if people do not understand the scale and threat of this problem, they will not support the policies that are necessary to deal with it. And we find this problem the whole time now across Western democracies. So I think it's a moral right that people should know about climate change. But it's also a legal right. Everyone should know because every country in the world has signed onto a commitment to inform and educate their peoples. Article 6 of a framework convention, Article 12 of the Paris Agreement requires all of the countries in the world to inform and educate their people. And they have utterly failed to do that. They bear the large part, the governments of the world bear the large part of responsibility for the failure to tell people about climate change and what is happening. I think it's fair to say the media have responsibility as well. The media has seriously underreported this issue for a long time. In my own country, for many, many years, they would have a climate scientist and a climate denier side by side as if these things were equally important debates. I think corporations have a responsibility, both by funding climate denial, but also by taking it as an opportunity to talk about how wonderful their own products are and not to talk about the wider issues. And I have to say, as a lifelong environmentalist, I feel that we in the progressive environmental movement also have a responsibility because we have spent the last 30 years talking to people who are just like ourselves. We are always talking in our bubble to support our members or to try and get more members or to hang out with our friends, and we never reach wider, which is why the vast bulk of the population in my own country is not engaged with this issue. Yeah, sure, they say that they're concerned, but actually if you ask them any detail, they don't know. Everybody has a right to understand climate change and to see it in terms of their own values and their own identity. This is not about producing another big fat report and hitting people over the head with it. There's a science to climate change. That is important. That is in the report. But there's also a science to communications. There's a great deal of evidence and research that shows that facts and figures do not of themselves motivate people. What makes the difference for people is a story built around their values and their identity, in which they can see themselves and a role for themselves and people like them. A story that is told by people who they trust. Yeah? Facts and figures fit within that, but that is what motivates people. If you don't trust who is telling you, if you don't understand it, if it doesn't speak to your values, you reject it. And these successful stories start not by saying, climate change, it's a nightmare, it's the biggest threat we've ever faced, and we're all going to die unless we do something, and maybe it's too late. Successful stories start by saying, you're great. Whoever you are great, you are important, you are worthwhile, validating people's identity and then saying, and you have an important role to play in this. So we build from that strength. When we are talking about anything, we start by validating people's identity. Everyone has a right to understand climate change in terms of their own values and their own identity. And this is where it gets tricky, because that everyone includes people that you might not like. I mean, we all like diversity, but in truth, when we talk about diversity, we mean diversity with people we like, or people we agree with. Diversity means people we don't like. The big issue on climate change is the division and the polarization between left and right. My left-wing friends, they say, sure, we want diversity, but we're not talking to them. We hate them. Well, they're part of a story as well. And we have been far too dominated with a progressive narrative coming from the left, which fails to ignore that large numbers of people have traditional values, they have conservative values, they are invested in their local community, they have different ways of thinking, and we need to find ways of speaking actively to them. So we're talking a lot these days about transformation. My own organization, Climate Outreach, has worked all around the world on what we think are transformational communications. We've worked in China, in India, across Canada. I recently did a big project in Alberta, a very, very divided area. We've got a project starting across the Middle East. In every place, finding the transformational narratives that start with people's identity and values for what they care about, reflecting those back and saying, if you take action on this, this is who you are, and you will be more who you are, not saving the polar bear or saving the planet, doing this because that is who you are. The transformational communications, though, must start by fundamentally recognizing this right that everybody should know and understand climate change and see within it their own values and their own identity reflected. But secondly, transformational communications requires transformational resources. You know, this is a euro, right? There you go. For every euro for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change spent last year, when the 1.5 degree report came out, a devastating report, and they were promoting that. For every euro the IPCC spent on communications, Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola spent 50,000 euros. That is the order of the incredible inequality of communications going on with this issue. For every euro spent on an existential crisis and trying to inform people about it, 50,000 euros were spent on sweet fizzy drinks. So we have to get governments facing their commitments in this right. And finally, I'd say, transformational communications is much, much bigger than just climate change. In all of the despair and the sadness we feel about climate change as an issue, the transformational aspect is if we go out and engage people, it's not just about who they are. There is a wider narrative about how finally we can maybe settle some of our differences and come together with a shared narrative of cooperation, working together, where the value that we speak to is the value of our shared humanity, our love of place, our love of each other, our love of our world, and how we work together. So I would say out of all of this, there is for hope that the transformation of climate change can also be the transformation of ourselves and the relationship that we have with each other. Thank you.